You may have seen headlines like these that show Black and other people of color who are homeowners receive one home valuation, and then when they simply change the photos of their family and perhaps even have a white friend stand in, then magically it seems the home appraises for tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars more. If you're like me, that probably has your spidey senses tingling because you know it's not magic. Something just isn't right. Well, such practices are referred to as the phenomenon of appraisal bias. When you buy or sell a home, likely you want to know that you're getting the fair market value. If you're buying, you don't want to overpay. And if you're selling, you don't want to get underpaid. The appraisal industry is responsible for such valuations. A bias, as you know, is simply defined as prejudice in favor of or against one thing, person, or group compared with another, usually in a way considered to be unfair. Thus, appraisal bias is prejudice in favor of or against one thing or person or group in the home valuation process, compared with another, usually in a way that is considered to be unfair, like when it's based on one's color, race, or any other legally protected class. As a step in the right direction, however, some appraisers are acknowledging the bias that muddles their industry and perpetuate unfair, illegal housing practices. As real estate professionals, that's exactly who we should be partnering with in our businesses. To dive deeper, let's talk about a couple more modern day examples of appraisal bias.
We have never had an appraisal done before. We've never refinanced a home before either. So it was all new to us and we really didn't know what to expect. So our lender just picked the appraiser and they were sent to our home. Essentially looking at the comps he used and figuring out that he didn't really care about the finishes of our home. He didn't ask about them. And then looking at the recent comps in our neighborhood, I determined that the appraisal was unfair. I submitted an appeal through our lender. I won the appeal process. I was then given a second appraisal done by a new appraiser company. I removed all of the family portraits around our home. My husband and my son left. And then we had a second appraisal, and the second appraisal came back at $504,000, which is almost $70,000 higher than the first appraisal. So that was kind of the nail in the coffin where I knew for sure we had been racially profiled and racially discriminated against because my husband is Black and my son is biracial during our appraisal process with the first.
Part of the refinance process, the bank scheduled an appraisal. And this was in June of this year. So we did our typical getting the home cleaned up and looking nice. And the appraiser came, my husband was home to show him around, answer any questions about the home, the neighborhood, upgrades. We've been through this process before. So we kind of anticipated what type of information we needed to provide in order to get a fair assessment of our house. And he mentioned on that day that the appraiser, he said, I know he's probably like really busy because this was in the summer where interest rates were really low. So a lot of people were refinancing, but he just seemed kind of in a hurry, rushed, not interested in asking or hearing any of the information that he was providing about the home itself. But we didn't think too much about it. We weren't too concerned because we had some previous appraisals from other refinance, and we knew that the community overall was doing really well. So we knew that we were going to get a high enough appraisal to pull out the cash that we wanted from the equity in the home after our refinance. But we were absolutely shocked when the appraisal came back, and it was actually lower than the appraisal that we got when we bought the house in 2015. And this is after tons of upgrades that we had invested over $30,000 in the backyard alone, had finished the entire basement. Our home is a Street of Dreams home in 2007. So it came with a lot of standard customizations and upgrades that you don't typically see in homes. The appeal process was cumbersome. It was, had to seek out advice from Amy because I'm not a real estate agent. I don't know this process. I don't know how it works. I just knew that we needed to fix it and I needed some help in how to navigate it. And she helped us navigate through that, answer the questions that they had. There was language in there. I didn't even know what it meant, but she helped us do that. And we got the appeal approved and the bank ordered a new appraisal on our home based on all of the discrepancies that we laid out in our appraisal submission.
Can you explain what that was like when you had to talk to the bank? I know we went back and forth because of the type of language and what they were asking you to prove, because I had a lot of those similar experiences. And I think it would benefit the audience to know what the bank was asking them directly to prove and ask why you wanted an appraisal, and were they going to charge you for those for that reappraisal? What hoops did you have to jump through?
Yeah, so they initially off the rip just rejected it because they said, first of all, you have to have MLS listings within a certain time period to use as comps. Again, I'm not a real estate agent. I don't have access to that information. Secondly, there is requirements and a lot of sort of legalese around what they mean when they say, comps, how they use square footage. Again, I mentioned the limitations on how much credit you get for a full basement in the state of Georgia. All of those things was just information that we didn't know. So every time we came back and said, he didn't even give us credit for our basement. He completely left it off the appraisal. It's like, well, you don't get credit for this. We didn't understand the nuances of how to come back to them when they rejected all of our initial protests and issues that we had with the appraisal. And you know what we ultimately had to do is we had to escalate it. We had to file a formal complaint and escalate it up into management within the department in the bank who reviews appraisals. And from there, there's language that my husband had to use in a lot of his communications that let them know that these types of things were in violation, and we know that it's in violation. And I do believe that language triggered the escalation that resulted in our appeal being approved, because otherwise we would not have been able to, I believe, like on sheer layman's knowledge, provide them with the information that was requested in these forms. They basically wanted us to do a full-on reappraisal of our home. Just to be completely honest, the questions were exactly what they would be asking in an appraisal, and they put the onus on us as the homeowner to do that appraisal rather than evaluating it based on the information that was included in the original one. And from that, because we suspected that there was intentional racial bias that devalued our home, I removed anything in the home that indicated race. So I have a lot of Black art in my home and sculptures, even to the point of the degrees that I have on the wall. I had graduated from an HBCU, so my bachelor's degree. My name alone indicates some level of ethnicity. So I took down all of those things. And then I asked a white neighbor to stand in as the homeowner on the day of the second appraisal. And it was just the complete opposite kind of appraisal experience that my white neighbor had in our home, same house, versus what my husband experienced in his own home. And that appraisal came back at $640,000, a 28% increase from the previous appraisal that was only 3-4 weeks apart. And nothing was different about the home other than who the homeowner was. Well, like Amy says, until we actually fix the system itself and remove these barriers for people of color, you may have to unfortunately jump through the hoops that we had to jump through. And it's a shame and it's sad, but I think about what would have happened if I needed to sell my home. That is $140,000 worth of wealth that would have been denied to me, my son, and any future generation. To Amy's point, how do you build wealth when it's physically taken from you? And we were lucky enough that we did not need to sell at a certain point. We weren't using that money for anything that required, it wasn't a dire need. But if it were, and so many families are in those positions, and they take whatever they can get and they move on because either A, they don't know any better, right? No one has talked to them about these issues. And so they say, well, this is the best that I can do. Or B, they just don't have the time, the energy, and quite frankly, the means to navigate it. And they move on because life is stressful enough.
my partner and I decided to get our home appraised. So we got some appraisers that were assigned by the bank where the mortgage is. They came in and they did the appraisal. When they came in, both of us were home. And so my partner answered the door, and then the appraisers came upstairs to where I was. I was doing a workshop. They came in to the room. And so they did the appraisal, they left. And when we got the valuation of the property, it was tens of thousands of dollars less than our purchase price, right? So we were kind of confused and flummoxed as to why there was such a discrepancy in the valuation. So what we ended up doing is getting a different company to do the appraisal. And what we did was I removed all of my books. Y'all know I got a lot of books on Black history, etc. We removed all of it. We removed all our photos. We actually have a smart fridge. So we put a white family on the smart fridge, and we got a close friend of ours, a white male, to actually come and open the door for us when this new group of appraisers came back. So unsurprisingly, what ended up happening is after the second person did the appraisal, the home was valued at tens of thousands of dollars higher than that first initial appraisal.
Real estate is that number one vehicle of building wealth. But most importantly, fair housing is essential for a community to thrive, because that's how we get our resources in a community, such as our grocery stores, our schools. That's how they're paid for. That's how our resources with the police department are, that making sure our tax dollars are really adequate and balanced out with the home values in the area. But if we, who happen to be in a minority majority community, are constantly being discounted, how are we able to make sure and govern that we're getting the right resources that we're supposed to be getting? If the people that I just purchased my home from that sold this house, it appraised for $400,000, and it's a 2-bedroom, 2.5 bath. I had a 4-bedroom, 3 bath, fully finished out, superior to this one. And I love this house, don't get me wrong, but that house was superior, and it only appraised for $340,000. Yet when I tried to refinance, the bank told me they were only going to give me a value of $285,000. And that's amazing, because I informed them, I myself am a real estate professional for 17 years, and I'm very familiar of what my house is valued, considering the house next door that is similar to the house I just sold. I sold it for $320,000, and my house was still superior in finishings and upgraded new roofs. Everything was upgraded to that house in comparison, but they were only going to give me a $285,000 value to sell. For me, my fiance passed away, so I was dealing with a depression within my own home of not having the kids there, not having my future husband there, and then being in an empty house by myself. I saw that as having to sell. And as much as I love that house, I love this house now. But it is a feeling of being forced. And so, yeah, being for someone to force you to have to reduce your amount, because I chose to take an owner occupant that was using an FHA loan. If they had not purchased, I would have been stuck with that appraisal for 6 months before I could have even accepted another FHA appraiser. And that's what I mean when we talk about being forced to take those discounts. Of our basis of living, but now we're having to also discount the only vehicle method of being able to build financial wealth, which is the number one way of building wealth in America. This is the challenge that we're always going to be up against. And so it's imperative that our white counterparts, at 1.5 million realtor members across the United States, only 6% of us are Black. And out of 4% of those 6% make up these committees that I am fortunate to be able to sit on, where we can go in front of Congress to help make these changes. This is why it's imperative that people like Ms. Davis actually stand up and speak out, because these are the experiences that I'm able to go back into these committees and share as proven points to be able to take to Congress in order to make these changes.